Well, soon to be Dr. Joseph Warren II. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Aunt Judy. One day soon. One day soon, I get a doctorate.
Well, you just called me Aunt Judy, so I guess we've already disclosed this very close relationship we have. However, that's good because today we want to talk about grief. And the first question people will have is, so what makes my nephew qualified to have this podcast conversation with me? So tell us a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about your background, your profession, what you're doing, your experience.
I sure shall. So, currently, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, licensed in the state of Virginia, Maryland, D.C. I've been in clinical practice for the past 24, 25 years.
That
I
long?
graduated from Oakwood College.
I'm not
25
getting
years.
old.
I
I'm not
graduated.
getting old. You're just okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I graduated from Oakwood University in 2000, obtained my master's in 2001 at Barry University in Miami Shores, Florida. And then I took a year off. I went to Korea as a missionary, and then I came back and I started my career in DeKalb, Illinois. But I first had 16 years of experience working in the school system from kindergarten to probably high school. And then I was a psychotherapist in Kaiser Permanente, which is an HMO. And now currently I'm working at the Veterans Administration in the PTSD, Post Traumatic Stress Disorder Clinic, supporting our veterans who are dealing with
Okay.
post traumatic stress syndrome.
Okay.
Um, so that's just a little bit. I keep going, but I just want to. That's a
That's
little
a
bit of
good
what I
highlight.
do.
And when do we expect to put fully with your name, Doctor?
Yes. So currently, I'm studying at the University of Kentucky, getting my doctorate of social work. Hopefully, I'll be graduating in 2026 with a degree of social work. So it's a doctorate of social work,
Okay.
and my focus is on finding culturally sensitive support programs for our veterans pertaining specifically African Americans and those of color
Mhm.
to help bring support for the providers who are providing those supports for veterans. So 2026,
All right.
that's the hope.
Just can you give us a just an idea of an example of what you mean by providing support for the supporters of the veterans who are suffering from
Right. Yeah. So what happens is that when providers are providing support for veterans, usually combat, we have a thing called MST, what is called military sexual trauma. We have a lot of veterans who come in who have combat experience, but not just combat, but also just life experiences. And so when we're working with veterans and we're working with people with PTSD, there's a thing called vicarious trauma that when we're working with them because of the projection and then counter projection or transference, it takes a toll on providers. And so it becomes emotionally draining when you're talking to these veterans and you're listening to their trauma, it affects you a lot. And so that's the reason why we're talking, because it's also grief. And that grief causes me as a provider saying, okay, I'm dealing with this. What am I going to do? How am I going to take care of myself? So the Veteran Administration is supposed to offer program support to help specifically providers doing that. And currently, with the new climate that we're in right now, we're not talking about that today, but there's some things that happen in the federal government where they're trying to take things away from our providers. They're trying to take things away from our veterans, and we're supposed to get the support, but those things are being taken away. And that's another topic on Judy, but
yeah, we're not going
I'm
to
going
talk
to go
about
there today.
that.
But
So when
yeah,
you
we're not going to talk about that, right? But just,
no, we're not doing that today. But when you talk about providers, so you mean the professional providers, you don't mean the spouses and the family members who are helping to care for the
So it's all encompassed, right? So as a provider, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but we have psychologists, we have psychiatrists, we have mental health providers, and the veterans come in and they're just pouring their heart out to us.
okay,
Well, they're
okay,
burning us out, and
okay,
so we need the support. And one of the things that I'm doing research on is what are some things that we can use to increase the support for providers helping our veterans.
okay,
But then there's another section called the caretakers or the caregivers. What are we
okay,
doing to help the wives or the spouses or the partners? And there's a whole other section to do
okay,
that. That's not my
okay,
wheelhouse, but yeah.
okay. All right. Well, You kind of alluded to it, and those who are listening very carefully may have caught it. But today we're going to spend time talking about grief. Now, usually when we talk about grief, people want to go to grief that comes from the loss, death. Let's just those kind of griefs. But GRM2, God's Will Ministries, is a program, is our ministry, particularly focused on women. But we want the men to come along too, and we definitely want them to financially support us. But we are experiencing a lot of losses, many kinds of losses. So how can we talk about grief like that? So I'll let you tighten up the question. So like right now, as you said, the climate, we're talking about loss of jobs, we're talking about a great amount of insecurity, chaos, confusion, conflicts. Um, and I think of grief as kind of being sad. And there are a lot of things that are making us sad. To tell the truth, sometimes I read the news and I'm surprised myself that I'm literally moved to tears because as I read the news, I'm just like, these people who are experiencing this, it's traumatic. It's a
Yeah.
lot of losses.
Yeah. So, as we talked earlier before we were on the podcast, we're talking about grief is just not contained to people who are losing a loved one or, the loss of a loved one. Grief can be a loss of relationship, as you mentioned. Grief can be a job or significant other. It can be changed in living situations. It could be the loss of support system and the loss of life. And unfortunately, it's affected me as well, on Judy, because I literally have to take time during the week to recharge myself because the the intensity of what's happening in our world today can sometimes affect the frontal lobe, which is here, and the executive functioning. And that's what grief does. Grief literally shuts down the mindset of understanding how to process. And those feelings of sadness, of of confusion, of anger can take one's person down.
Mm.
And so to make it even tighter, there's a difference between grief with men and grief with women.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about the men, and I'm going to talk about the research that they have with women, and then you're going to clarify and clean it up because I am not going to explain it. And I'll be clarified because I'm speaking, like you said, the audience is women. I
But
can
we've
only
got men listening too,
okay, men too, right?
because we're talking about veterans, we're going to have a lot of women who are going to want their
Yes.
men folks to hear this.
That's right. And there's also women veterans too, whose
Right.
husbands or spouses or partners.
Mhm.
But I want to say this because you're my aunt, and I got to put this out here. When I talk about women in grief, I can only go to what my mother and what my sister went through when we lost your brother, my father.
Mhm.
Um, to have that first experience of what it means, I can read books, I can look at theories, but because it's a conversation, it's very important that the first thing that we have to do is to recognize that there's a difference between men and women and how they grieve differently.
Mhm.
And that's very, very important.
So wait a minute. So why don't we start with some basic information here? Are there types of grief? And
Yeah,
what's anticipatory grief?
right. So one of the things I share with my veterans and my patients is that when you're anticipating something, it causes this sense of hypervigilance or anxiety. When you hyper focus in any aspect of your life, the past, the present, or the future, it causes a chemical reaction within your body. So when you're thinking about the future and you're not in a mindset of peace, it's called anticipatory grief, something that's going to happen. When you focus in the past, it causes depression. When you focus in the present, it causes stress. So we have depression, stress, and anxiety. So the anticipatory anxiety is what I'm going through right now. I'm working for the federal government and I know that there are going to be job cuts. So currently, right now, 80,000 positions within the veteran administration is supposed to be slashed. I don't know when it's going to happen, on Judy. So literally, there's grief in my loss, even though I know what's going to happen. So I'm concerned that something is going to happen that's anticipatory. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm thinking it's going to happen pretty soon.
It's almost like we're worrying about tomorrow before tomorrow gets here. And while
Exactly.
the Bible encourages us to trust God for tomorrow, we're still humans, and it takes a lot of spiritual growth and maturity to think to yourself, okay, tomorrow I may lose my job. Maybe not be tomorrow as in Monday or Tuesday, but it's coming down the pipe, and I don't know when it's going to hit, but it is supposed to hit, and when it hits, it's going to be a Mack truck hitting a little tiny car.
Yeah, so that's one type of grief, but there's several types. I can give you four. We have complicated grief. We
What
have
is that?
disenfranchised grief. We have cumulative grief. We have hidden grief. We have delayed grief. And so when we're looking at complicated grief, we're talking about prolonged, intense grief that disrupts daily functioning. Um, we can speak on your behalf, on Judy, of how you've had complicated grief, some things that you've gone through. I don't know if you share with your audience, but
I'm part of my healing is starting to talk about it. So I went through a 5-year season of just
that's right.
life-changing losses. Let's just call them what they were,
Yeah,
losses. And it, I guess I had a little bit of anticipatory grief in there, because when I saw light at the end of the tunnel, I would freeze, because is this the light of I'm finally coming through this process? Or is that another oncoming train full with more grief for me? So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so that's complicated because it just kept on coming. Uh, we have this thing called cumulative grief, where your audience knows of some of the things you've gone through, but in our family, we just had grief on top of grief. We've had loss upon loss. And then COVID-19, right?
Right.
That was a lot of loss that caused a lot of things that happened. Then we had delayed grief, right? Where experienced later than expected. I remember when my father, your brother, was, he knew he was sick. He didn't let us know until I believe it was too late, but he literally let us know. And then he said, I'm going to retire in May. And then he passed away in October because he knew, but he didn't want us to know until so that was delayed grief. He kind of wanted to let that go on a little bit. So there's all these
It could,
types.
delayed grief also has in it that component of um, the person the person realizes that their loved ones are not going to handle well
That's right.
the knowledge of what's coming down the pipe. It's almost like the person who's going to, for this purpose, it's like the husband who's lost a job, but he gets up and he goes to work. He gets up and he leaves the house as if he is going to work
That's right.
every day, because he understands, well, I won't be so sexist, the breadwinner, the major breadwinner of the family, who has lost his or her job, gets up every morning and goes out as if they're going to work, and they don't bother to tell their partner, because they expect that their partner's not going to handle it well, and that's just going to add more stress to their lives, because their plate is full right now with the reality that I don't have a job, I don't know how the bills are going to be met, and so on and so forth. So, and we need, and I think many people actually don't share what's going on, because the people that they're going to share it with, their response is going to make it more difficult for them. But that's just a tidbit.
Yeah, yeah. So when you look at that, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that when it goes to the original question, then when you asked when we first started, the differences between men and women,
Mm-hmm.
how do men grieve differently?
Wait, before you do that, before you go there, let's finish those types of grief. That's really interesting here. Let's finish, give us like 4 kinds.
Yeah, so there's more than four, but I think I said complicated, disenfranchised,
What's
cumulative.
disenfranchised?
So I'll make it as simple as possible on Judy.
But make it simple. You're talking, yeah, you're talking.
I'll make it simple, right?
Okay.
So disenfranchised grief is grief that is not socially acknowledged or supported, leading to a sense of isolation.
I can give you a good example of that.
Yes, we
What's
both
the
can.
difference? Being a divorce attorney, there's a huge difference between getting a divorce and your spouse dying. Society society will rally around you and help you when you have lost your spouse partner. But a divorce is a living death, and it, yeah, it's kind of hard to feel society
That's right.
support for that.
Yeah.
It's very
And
difficult.
when it comes to faith, when it comes to religion, when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to things that are happening in our world today, there are certain people who are being disfranchised. We're going to stay focused on it, I promise you, but there's disfranchised in what they're experiencing. So Currently, the government that we're in right now, I'm not get political with you, they're disenfranchising a lot of different people. I am supposed to be disfranchised because I am a federal employee, and they're purposely attacking federal employees, saying that we're doing.
Mhm.
There's immigrants, there are women, there are men being disfranchised, and because that's a particular type of grief, people sometimes don't even recognize that.
Mhm.
Um, so that's disenfranchised grief, right?
All right.
Um, Another one is hidden grief, right? Feeling of loss that may not be visible to others and are unexpressed. So there's this, I can use a biblical example now, is that when the disciples knew that Jesus was going to die, right? And Jesus knew that he was going to go to Calvary. He didn't really share as much as that he wanted to, because he went to support, right? But when he went to Gethsemane, we saw that hidden grief when he was in Gethsemane, had the weight of the world, and he was sweating blood, right? He had to put all the world upon his shoulder. That's a symbol of hidden grief.
Oh,
He
I can
knew.
relate. Wait. Okay. I can relate to that because when I was going through the process of being removed from my job as a judge there in Tallahassee, I couldn't really talk to anybody about it.
Right.
There was a real sense of I didn't trust anybody. I didn't know who my friends and who my enemies were, and my friend enemies, as they say. My husband had died, and that was my number one support system. Your brother, who was absolutely my support system, he was gone.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had this grief that I couldn't share with anybody. So I would summarize it this way. You look like a duck on top of the water. You're
That's right.
perfectly calm and beautiful and just swimming along. And under the water, you are paddling for dear life.
And that's exactly right. It's sort of like when we see the ice, the iceberg, where
Mhm.
it's up top and then below. That's exactly what you're going through. I remember your son, my cousin Jason, said when we were asking you said this thing about double downing. You were like, I'm going to double down. I have to double down because that's the only thing I can do. Because knowing, and we'll talk about later if you want to ask about how to help someone through grief and bereavement, but no one can walk in your shoes except you.
Yeah.
And that's very, very important that people understand. So,
Let me just finish that sentence. I was doubling down in my faith because at
yes,
that point, that was all I had to hold on to. What's another type? Now we're gonna have to give people, we're gonna get all right. We must give our listeners some real practical points
yes,
on how to
yeah,
deal with it. But let's finish this and then we'll shift over to that. What's another type of grief?
yeah. So I mentioned also delayed grief. I mean, kind of mentioned that before already.
Okay.
So,
Delayed
we have,
grief is what this is really fun. Well, I shouldn't say fun, but delayed grief is what I'm experiencing now. I couldn't grieve I couldn't grieve all of my losses in Tallahassee. It was just too painful. Everything was a reminder of the
that's right.
losses that I had sustained. And so I'm actually finding that being here in Tennessee is allowing me to kind of go back now and do the grief work that I could
Correct.
not get done back there. So delayed grief, that's when you wake up one morning and you're crying and you're just like, why am I crying? What am I crying about? And finally, your mind will say to you, what you're really crying about is what happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You still have mothers who grieve the loss of their children.
That's correct.
And it's delayed in the sense that the process of grieving it's not finished work. The work's not finished. We haven't come to grips with it. We haven't come to peace with it. We haven't come to terms with it.
That's right. And that's another one that I mentioned, but it's called ambiguous grief,
Can be.
where it's tied to situations without closure. And that's what you're saying right now. I remember when someone asked me, Joseph, how are you dealing with the grief? Um, you know, lost dad in 2012, lost Uncle Jim, your husband in 2013, lost my mother in 2014, lost Camille, your niece, my sister in 2017. And I share with people, it's sort of like when I lost my dad, I was at Walmart in the parking lot. Then when I lost Uncle Jim, I was in Target parking lot. Then I lost my mom and I was in Costco. And when you come back, you go to these different parking lots and say, all right, now I'm ready to go back to Walmart, unpack that grief, deal with that grief, then go back to this part. And that's exactly what you're mentioning, where it's delayed, it's ambiguous, it's complicated, it's all mixed together. And that's one thing I want to share before I forget is that grief is not this linear, right?
Mhm.
Grief is up and down, left and right. And we use a yarn, like a yarn and
Mhm. Mhm.
I forgot what it's called. It's crocheting, right?
Crochet, or just knitting, anything that you use.
Knitting, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's one thing I want to share with you, your listeners is that grief is not just it's not very black and white. It's very gray.
I can give you
And
a
so
great example of that.
yeah,
Every Saturday night, it seems that I have an emotional meltdown. I've been able to process it enough to realize that on Saturday nights are when I miss my husband the most.
Mhm.
Um, and we played Scrabble. That was our addiction. I have Scrabble games, the big ones, the little ones. We traveled with Scrabble. So we played Scrabble in Africa and in the Caribbean. We traveled with Scrabble. And I will binge on playing Scrabble on Saturday night. And it's the only time. And so I've been able to make that connection, but I haven't been able to make the next step of letting it go. It's like on Saturday nights, that's when I miss him the most. And
yeah,
so playing Scrabble,
yeah,
and the other thing of it is, no matter how great the day Saturday has been, I really struggle to let it go. It's like, okay, so anyway, but this is not my therapy session. But you know what? But I think that I'm glad we're having this conversation because it shows how real it is in our lives. All right, so where do we go
yeah.
from here?
So I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure if you have questions that I've already sent to you, or if I can just move forward and let you know the
Let's talk
difference.
about let's
Yeah,
talk about I think just labeling the kinds of grief is tremendous because once we can give names to things, now
yeah,
we can begin to process it. We can begin to look at it. We can turn it over. We can examine it. So now that we've given names, so run through those types of grief again, right quickly for the
sure. Just real quick,
listening.
and that complicated grief, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, cumulative grief, hidden grief, delayed grief, and ambiguous grief. And I
Okay.
can, email those names to you as well if you like.
Oh,
Um,
by the way, right there's a good time. Let's do a commercial break.
sure.
Um, are you available if someone wants to reach out to you?
Sure. So one of the things is that because yes, I'm available. However, they would have to be in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia because that's where I'm
Okay.
licensed. So if they want Christian counseling, I can do that. But if they are looking for a licensed clinical social worker, it would have to be in those 3 states where
And
I'm
how
licensed.
and how would they contact you?
So I can give you my number, and then they can contact that number, or I have another email address
Yeah,
that
give
they
them
can.
I know, give them an email address that you will check if they reach
Yeah,
out
I
to you
would say,
today.
yeah.
Okay.
So the email address is warrenjoe508, WARRENJOE 508 at gmail.com. And they can email me at that and I'll reach out to them.
Okay, say that
Um,
one more time, that email address.
sure. Warren Joe 508. So that's WARRENJOE 508 at gmail.com.
Okay, so if they reach out with you there, and if
Yeah.
they want to talk to you about actually engaging your services, they have to be in the Virginia, Maryland, DC area. That's where you're licensed.
Yeah, that's what I'm licensed. But I think we talked before that, if someone needs counseling support or if they have questions and they're not in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, I can still speak with them. But, services, providing clinical services, they would have to be in those 3 states.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so give them an example of what they're going to get when they spend time in your office. Do they lay on the couch or they sit in a chair?
So right now it's gonna be virtual. So I'm
Okay.
standing up because I need to stand up to keep. But literally, therapy is getting to know a person and helping the person realize the skills that they already have, and just building on the skills that they have, and then also helping them see things that they haven't been able to see. So literally what I tell all my, it doesn't matter if veterans, if it's not, I'm also have a little private practice as well, but all I do is have them come in, and you already know me out here, Judy. I'm very non-threatening. I smile too much, but it's very opening, very like a conversation we're doing now. And you know, my strength is the Bible. My strength is using spiritual connections and building network. A lot of people don't know this, but therapy, if you use, so for example, and I don't mean to toot my horn, but in the VA, I have been trained in evidence-based practices. So there's certain type of procedures that I use with veterans. So it's called prolonged exposure, PE. There's another evidence-based called CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy. There's another one called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. And what God, Judy, this is great because you know me as your nephew, but this is awesome. So so literally I've been trained that whoever I meet, it doesn't matter who they are, what background they come from, I can relate to them. And a lot of these modalities and these therapies are rooted, people don't know this though, but they're rooted in the Word of God. And so a lot of what I do is called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is called CPT. And cognitive behavioral therapy in simple terms is what you think affects how you feel, and then your feelings affect your behavior. And so when I meet people, they can be stuck and not being able to do. So for example, we're not doing therapy without Judy because I love you, can't do it. But when you are struggling on Saturday night, what we have to do is not change what happened, but change how you view playing Scrabble on Saturday night. And the thing that can help you do that is change the way that you have doing things. So you have to change things up. You already know the saying that if you do the same thing over and over again, and you want the same results, it's called insanity, right? So you have to change that mindset. We're not doing therapy on Judy.
No, we're not. But here's the problem. The problem is I really do love playing Scrabble. So if anybody wants a Scrabble partner online, yeah, I love playing Scrabble. All right, I'm watching the clock. So
yeah,
let's give some coping mechanisms that men and women can commonly use in grief in our last few minutes. I think we're going to have to do a part two. Doc. I think we're going to have to do a part two. This is good.
So one of the things I'm going to do is stick to the Bible right now. And then if you want to come back for a second, we can do some more psychological. But one of the things that I bet the Holy Spirit gave me is called calm. CALM. And calm is something that everyone can do, men or female, men or women, that can help them deal with the grief. So one of the things that is so important is to remain calm, is that when we're stressed or when we're fearful, we forget to breathe. Our bodies are so automatic in doing things that we sometimes have to be intentional in making sure that we remain calm. CALM is an acronym that stands for CALM. So C stands, come unto me, all who labor and heavy laden, and I will give them rest. That's in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. So when you come, you're literally saying, I can't do it anymore, Lord. So I'm coming to you. A stands for ask. Asking you shall receive, seeking you shall find. That's in Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. So when you're coming to God, you're saying, God, this is something that I'm dealing with, and I really need you to handle it. L stands for leave it at his feet. That's in Psalms. That's Psalms 50, verse 26, where it's lay thy burdens upon the Lord's feet. And then M stands for move in the spirit and not in the flesh, or by faith and not by sight. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. When you recognize that you leave your burdens at the feet, you come up with a new mindset. Things haven't changed. You're still going through it, but you're walking through faith and not through sight. So literally, you're telling yourself that I'm going through a difficult time. I'm dealing with some grief. I'm dealing with some anticipatory grief. But because God creates the heaven and the earth, and because he controls all things, then I can walk in faith. Now, calm is also in the world, right? And calm also helps with breathing. And so what I tell my patients and my veterans is that we got to learn how to breathe. And when you learn how to breathe correctly, you begin to allow the parasympathetic system in your body to decrease the tension in your life. Breathing is so automatic that we forget how to breathe.
All right. So we're going to slow this down because this is everybody listening. and sharing this, we want to start right here. Let's learn how to breathe. It's amazing how many times when I'm really stressed, I stop and I say, okay, breathe, just breathe. I may not be breathing correctly, but the thought of just breathe. Okay, so walk us through it. This is our exercise. Let's walk through it.
You can do it, yeah. So what you do is, I'm gonna turn my face this way so you can see it, right? But what you're doing is that you're breathing in your nose
All
and
right,
you're
let's do it.
expanding your diaphragm.
All right,
I'll give you an
everybody,
example.
everybody, let's set up. Let's set up. All right, we're breathing through our nose. All right.
Breathe through your nose, and your diaphragm in your stomach, think of it as a balloon. You're literally blowing, and so your diaphragm is expanding to increase the air. And then as you're breathing out, you're pushing in your diaphragm. So you're pushing out the belly and you're breathing out your mouth.
Got my.
So the key is that when you breathe in, you need to hold for a couple of seconds
Breathe in.
and then breathe out. So you're going to breathe in your nose, and we call it 4-7-8. But for those who can't breathe, you can do 1, 2, 3. It's okay. You breathe in your nose. You hold it for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you blow out. You literally push your belly in and you'll notice that your shoulders will go down. You'll notice that
Power up. So let me get my shoulders down. All right. I'm breathing in and I'm visualizing my stomach going out. I'm breathing in and my stomach's going out.
And as you're breathing out, your stomach's coming in. But you got to open your mouth too.
Open my mouth, not through your teeth.
Not through your teeth. So what happens is that the oral fixation, I'm not a doctor, but the oral fixation is an experience where when the air blows out, it's like your lips. So you go.
All right, listeners, let's do it again. All right, we're breathing in, and I'm gonna use my to count 7. All right, we're breathing in.
Hold it for 7 seconds or 3 seconds or how long you hand it. And when you breathe out, and that's what you do. And the thing that I tell people who are faith believers is that if you remember in Genesis, when God created the heavens and the earth, he spoke and it came. And when he created man, he got on his knees. We call them those dusty knees. And he breathed in man the breath of life. So what I tell people is that this is what CPR is doing. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I preached in Korea called Christ personal resuscitation. Where Christ is breathing in the Holy Spirit, you hold on to them and then you breathe out self. And this breath is so powerful because even when Jesus left, he says, I breathe on you. His breath is so amazing. So literally what you're doing, you're going through grief, you're going through anxiety, you're going through stress, and you're like, God, I can't do it anymore. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe in your word. Because we know Aunt Judy, I'm not here to preach, but his word is life. So when you use the memory verses, when you read the scriptures, you're breathing in his word. You're holding on to it because you don't want to let go of the word, but then you breathe out self. And when you do that, your body and your mind are connected and you're able to, that's one thing that I do with my patients.
All right. So I'm already ready for part 2. I'm already ready for part 2. I think our listeners are as well. So we're going to end today with listeners. Number 1, 2 things we're going to take away from this. Well, I'm going to give you a third one, and that is neither sadness nor joy lasts forever. Right. Life is filled with the changes of the seasons, and we need to be able to be as comfortable when things are hard as we are as comfortable when things are good. And so our soon to be Dr. Warren has given us 2 points to remember. Number 1, breathe. Remind yourself that you must breathe in and then exhale. And in his value system, we're breathing in faith and life that comes from telling God, I've got to come to you. This is more than I can handle. Not only am I going to come, but I'm going to ask you to help me. Many times we don't get help because we don't ask for help.
Sure.
Number three is the one that's going to be challenging. We're literally going to leave it there. You know, we tell God all about stuff, and then when we get up from our knees, it's like we didn't leave anything there. We just take it back with us. And number four is calm, which is we're now going to move in a different perspective because we have told God we need him to help us, and we've given it to him,
Right.
and we've left it there on his desk. And so when we are tempted to want to have those moments of panic and stress and fear and depression, we then move in the position of quoting a Bible text, casting all our cares on him, for he careth for us. In all things, give him thanks, for this is the will of God concerning you. Both of those are freeloading, or not freeloading, but free translations. But in everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning us. And I think that's Philippians 4. All right, this was great. Thank you so much.